Hey everybody, it's Gene Marks and welcome back to another episode of Biz Books. Very glad to have you here. Hope you're enjoying this series. Boy, I've been doing this now like it's going on 2 years. I've interviewed just fantastic authors of business books from all around the country and all different types of related topics. And today is no different. I'm speaking to Alexsys Thompson. Lexi, back in 2020, published a book called The Power of a Graceful Leader, Flow, Integration, and Alignment. This is a book that I think everyone running an organization, not necessarily a business, but any organization, would just get great advice from and really find value from reading this book. So, Lexi, thank you very much for joining me today.
No, you're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm thrilled to have you. By the way, where are you calling in from? Where are you based?
The Green Mountains of Vermont.
Beautiful.
Yeah, it is gorgeous.
Are you born and raised there, or?
I am, but I took a 25-year hiatus into Texas for a large part of my life.
Goodness. Okay.
Yeah.
We may get to that. Vermont is we went with our kids a couple of times to Smuggler's Notch in Vermont, and
yes,
the Ben and Jerry's factory and all that. I mean, it's absolutely gorgeous.
Yeah.
So The Power of a Graceful Leader. So let's get a little background about the book, Lexi. First of all, tell us a little bit about yourself, business-wise, and how you came to write this book.
Sure. So I'm an entrepreneur by nature. And I currently function like my paycheck is executive coaching, conflict mitigation, those types of things in the C-suite and senior level suites. And the book was kind of born out of the evolution of doing that work. And one of the things that I have a gift for and I enjoy is seeing patterns in behavior. And I started to track certain different types of patterns and ask consistent, curious questions along about a decade's worth of coaching and leadership work. And that's how The Power of Graceful Leadership was born. Yeah.
So you earn your money as an executive coach, but this book, I guess, is a culmination of many years of doing what you're doing. I believe it, because there's a lot of good stories in there and a lot of good advice. You say that, I'm going to read this out to you from the book, that graciousness is an experience we have when we awaken to our emotional life and are accountable for how we share that emotional life in our relationships. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, that was a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Why do you say that?
Well, because I think like most people in at least this part of the world, we lead with our head. It's analytical, it's theoretical, it's A plus B plus C, most of us.
Right.
And I'm not an exception in the sense of my emotional EQ in the beginning of my leadership journey was probably a 2 out of 10. And the models that I had based upon the time that I grew up in leadership were male command and control environments.
Yep.
And not making it wrong, just I will say it's outdated, but that's what I learned. And in that model, there wasn't a lot of room for most people at the time to stop and ask, well, what about how I feel? Or what about how they feel? In fact, that was actually admonished a fair amount. We don't care how you feel, no crying at work, all the things. And so the graciousness piece is the invitation to explore that part of who you are. And through graceful leadership or any other body of work that you choose, to enter in there and start doing some really good integration practice in what I believe is the shortest yet the hardest journey from head to heart. And then getting that loop and that figure 8 that's on the book, getting that figure 8 moving in both directions as needed and easily accessible.
You talk about this emotional life and how to bring that into your relationships. I mean, so many managers and leaders are taught to just lead by the numbers, show, no fear, show no of their personality other than just their business side. I'm thinking of like Alec Baldwin and Glengarry Glen Ross,
Yes.
always be closing, kind of thing. I mean, that type of style, you just said it earlier, it's pretty outdated, isn't it?
It is. Yeah.
Why?
It is. Well, for the first time in my lifetime, and I think for longer than that for sure, we have 4, sometimes 5 generations at work.
Oh.
And in that, that's a diversity conversation just around generational differences. And the younger generations coming in, of which I've raised two 30-year-olds now, the questions that they have and what they're willing to tolerate and what their expectations are, some would call it entitlement, some would say expectations, are very different than mine were going into the organization. And that changes how we work, which we're seeing. It changes the questions that a leader needs to be able to navigate. If you're interviewing someone and they come into your organization and you aren't, if they didn't ask and you aren't speaking into purpose in some way around what is it that gets them up and lights them up, and is there a way for you to match that into the work they're doing, even lightly so, it's going to be a big miss for you in the long run in the organization. And with the talent crunch that we're under, it's more important than ever.
It's really funny too, because the average age of small business owners in this country is 55 years old. I mean, more than half of small business owners are over the age of 50. There's like this big generational thing that's going on. And I think people my age, I'm 58, we didn't grow up that way. We didn't grow up about being a graceful leader. Our bosses barked out orders and expected us to just comply.
Yes.
And don't you find like your kids, you said your kids are like, 30 years old. My kids are near in that age as well. I have 3 that are in their late 20s. They're, first of all, I find their whole generation to be not only more open to graciousness, but also more self-confident as well. To call people out when they're not being that way.
Yeah. Their willingness to allow what you and I allowed because it was modeled and because it was how the storyline of how we got ahead, in an organization.
Yeah.
They don't have that storyline.
They do not.
And they saw us suffer. They
did.
Quite frankly, from that storyline. So they're flipping the script on us. I'm really thankful, and I believe, I get a lot of senior leaders saying that the younger generation coming in is lazy. They don't want to work. They expect I'll hand it to them. They want a senior director role and they haven't even done the entry level senior accounting role, whatever the storyline is.
Right.
And in all candidness, that is a perception shift, that if that leader was to just shift to the left or the right a little bit and look at it from a different perspective, I think they'd see a whole new world.
Yep.
And that doesn't mean that those things don't exist, but those things exist at all ages. It's not a generational thing.
Yeah. I mean, listen, people of older generations have always been calling younger generations lazier than them. That goes back to the beginning of human civilization. And I also don't buy into that narrative either. Lexi, like you must see the same thing. I don't know what your kids do, but like I'm sure you see your kids and you see your kids' friends. I know my kids and my kids' friends. I mean, they work hard. I mean, they have a lot of hardworking friends. And even like I live in Philadelphia, and when I, even going out to restaurants, to Starbucks, to different, there are a lot of people in their 20s that are working like their asses off, know? So I don't know. I think to go into with that attitude, I think impacts you as a manager and and a leader, automatically assuming that people aren't gonna perform. You say also in your book, you talk a little bit about in a prior life you worked with missing children, which I'd love to hear a little bit about, because you said that you witnessed many other couples who fell into like patterns of condemnation instead of grace, and I'm curious why you explain to us why that's not a good thing.
Well, I mean, I don't think you nor I can understand the pressure of a missing child. Right. So we have to acknowledge that first. So I got as close as I hope I ever get into being able to be in really intimate spaces with parents moving through that living hell, quite frankly. And I would say this is the case under anything where partnership, it doesn't just have to be marriage, is stressed in a way that there's no social norming for it. And there's no social norming for what you're supposed to do and when you're supposed to do it, and the grieving process around a missing child. It just doesn't exist.
Right.
Okay. And if it did, it probably wouldn't be effective anyway.
Right.
So inside of that, everyone's trying to figure out their own role and what to do with these emotions, because they go across the board in nanoseconds, and emotions that most of us might never acknowledge feeling the depths of the sorrow and the anger and the just the grief of that whole experience. So when you are trying to keep yourself afloat and you look over and there's your partner, you know, and they're trying to do the same thing, oftentimes one of you grasps onto the other's life preserver and unknowingly pulls that person underwater.
Right.
It's just a human reflex. It's not usually an intended evilness to it, but
That's
it
the
is something that
condemnation part
happens.
you're talking about, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And so you look across the aisle and you say to your spouse, well, if you hadn't let our little boy go out after 6, which we agreed would never happen, you know how that storyline can very
Yep.
easily go, because being willing to accept ownership for something that horrific, I don't think it's easy to do. But it's way easy for all of us to just put it over there, to make it the spouse's problem, the community's problem, the abductor's obviously problem, society at large's problem. You know, if we were doing this better as society, we wouldn't have pedophilia be such a thing. If that wasn't so, it's a long drawn out story.
Sure.
And there's moments in there in any conflict that we have internally or externally, and this is definitely both of those, where we have windows of spiritualness that comes in, and sometimes it sweeps us up and it becomes the life preserver depending upon our faith and our practices, and other times it's the thing that holds our head under the water. Either way, there's grace that sits inside all of that shared communion between the two people, for sure, and the community that's assisting that family unit through that trauma. And most often, because we aren't well trained and we don't have a lot of EQ as a society, quite frankly, we are put our hand on our partner's head and hold them underwater, not intending to, but that's the condemnation piece. And then we also have to understand, when you put your hand on my head underwater, I also have my hand on my head underwater. So it's this compounding effect, because I'm already, if in fact there's any truth that I did let our son go out after 6 o'clock and shouldn't have, because I went to turn the tea kettle off for that nanosecond, right? I'm already putting myself underwater, and you're having a compounding effect to that, which I may never come out of. And usually the relationship fractures when there's no moments of grace that are experienced between those two people along the journey.
To connect this to just countless real world business examples, it's a matter of when something goes wrong, you know, in a project or with a client or a customer or whatever. And if you're a leader and you're a gracious leader, you don't throw people under the bus is what is what I'm taking away from this, and saying, listen, we're all part of the problem. It's not just you, right?
Right. And I think one of the when we look at the tenets for a graceful leader, the stillness versus action, and being able to understand that both of those things are going to be required, but which comes first, second, and then loop back for the third, and being willing to flow with what's needed rather than just constantly being in reaction mode, and really pausing so that we have a thoughtful, conscious response rather than a reaction.
You know, you dig into this, you know, in later chapters in the book, and, you know, we might as well talk about it now because we can easily jump around. But, you know, I mean, you talk about the importance of stillness. And again, that is a, how can I, I just finished watching the finale of Succession. I don't know if you saw that or not. And you're one of the main characters, one of the kids is a guy named Kendall who's trying to be CEO, and he had many weaknesses, but one of the strengths that he has is that when like disaster strikes, where there's some issue and there's some problem or whatever, he did just like kind of stop and take it in, you know, like, hey, okay, you know. And I thought that was like a strong, a good thing about him. Although again, there are not good things about him. And that's what you write about. Like that is part of being a graceful leader, is being able to absorb that stuff with that stillness, right?
Yeah. And when we talk about that, there's a nuance to that, because that's what I like. That's something that I was able to demonstrate under crisis, but I wasn't able to have the elegance that I had in crisis in the mundane.
Yeah.
And so when you have someone that has that skill set, being able to understand that this is a crisis, and this other thing, me applying that same skill set over here actually becomes the problem, not the solution, is an important nuance for leaders that have that gift.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It makes a lot of sense. And I think about some of the bosses I've had, some of the clients that I've got now that are really good at, people management. They have a calmness about them,
Yeah.
and they're I mean, again, disasters happen every day, to different
Hmm.
levels, and how they handle them at first, it's like they just drink it in first.
Yeah.
You write about something called conscious leadership, and you say it's an important step to graceful leadership. Can you explain the difference between the two?
Yeah. So consciousness is the awareness. Like it starts in the journey of self-development or internal discoveries of ourselves. It starts with the whole idea that I now have this awareness that I am something other than I am. So I'm the observer of self, that whole concept. So when you're able to stand outside yourself and be the observer, the automatic thing that shows up is choice.
Okay.
So now if I'm in reaction mode, right, like we talked about a few minutes ago,
Yeah.
and I can create and I can have a conscious moment in the reaction, I can choose something other than the reaction. And that's conscious leadership. It's being able to be aware I'm applying who I am in the situation appropriately, getting the desired result, or not appropriately getting the desired result, and then being able to choose something else, whatever else the something else is. Graceful leadership is actually the behavior that underpins the something else that's best aligned with yourself in the situation. Does that help?
It does.
Okay.
It makes me think a lot more. And conscious, you say that conscious leadership, it's just it's a way of thinking, right? It
Yeah.
is um and it is and would you say that conscious leadership is a way of putting things into perspective as well?
I do think that consciousness requires us to play with different perspectives, right? When I have and when I continue to use meditation as one way to have a consciousness experience, I also am playing with what I call a kaleidoscope in some ways, and I'm looking at a situation that's presenting itself from underneath, above it, from the side of it, so that I can get a full view of it rather than just the face value of what's presenting itself. And that's where that pause that we talked about has so much value.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Okay. So, the core of the book is that you talk about these 6 tenets of
Mhm.
graceful leadership.
Yeah.
And just, you probably know them by heart, but it's integrating, evolving, transparency, connecting, co-creating, and being compassionately powerful.
Yeah.
I don't want to give away the farm on this interview. I don't want people to buy the book, so
That's
people
fine.
can dive into some of these concepts. But I guess I'll throw it back out to you, Lexi. Like, of those 6, tenets, would you like to pick one or two that you would like to talk about now, that just to give our audience just sort of like a flavor of
Yeah.
kind of advice given?
Thank you for asking. The two that people want to know the most about, so I'll go with that more than what
Okay.
I necessarily want to talk about. The ones they ask about the most are transparency and compassionately powerful.
Okay.
So the transparency tenet is literally pretty much what it says. It's the ability and the desire, right? And that's for me, that was the hard part, the desire to really look within and be willing to see all the factions of yourself and come into a place of acceptance, realignment, redeployment, but in a way that your value system and how you are showing up internally and externally start to come into alignment. And that's very easily said, and it's not easy to do.
Not,
You
it's
know,
funny when I read a part about about being transparent, it reminds me a lot of being a parent as well. I mean, when you see like some parents may see in the movies on TV that they have a certain way that they are with their children, and
mhm.
the way they have their family dinners or the way they sit down and have talks with them. And I was never like the kind of guy that I was. Um, and I never felt comfortable doing that at a very early age. I made the decision myself to say, listen, what you see is what you get, like, I'm not gonna hide the fact that I don't know what I'm talking about, to my own
Yep,
kids,
yep,
rather than try and fake my way through it, because
yeah.
your kids will see that immediately. And I think your employees, your people that you're leading will see right through you, right?
Well, they do, and what happens is you're saying this thing, but they know something else, but they
Yeah.
can't they can't put the words, or they can't speak into it because it's not psychologically safe, most likely, for anyone. Um, and so that creates this whole lack of flow in the team, a lack of safety for the team, and definitely a lack of performance. So when you can be willing to just show up as you are, and own all the amazingness that you are, don't shy away from that either, which equally I see happen. But also, when you don't know what you don't know, just acknowledge it and then go do something about it, right? If the
Right.
gap is you need another person in the room that has that knowledge, or you need to go acquire the knowledge, it doesn't matter. But that's really one that most people, specifically the ages in the 40s to early 50s, are struggling with, because they saw something else as they were growing up.
Yep.
And now they're being asked to do this other thing. And they're really unsure if it's safe. And in many situations, it doesn't feel it. And sometimes it isn't.
Yep.
So it's a little bit of a dilemma. It takes
And
bravery.
it's also, listen, I mean, I think when I was reading this, I was thinking about how we all suffer from imposter syndrome.
Yes.
I mean, we all, don't, we try to project an image of ourselves, and we know deep down inside, we're like, there are people figuring out that I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about type of thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so, and you do get to a certain point in your life where that becomes less important. You become
Yes.
more self-confident and secure. But when you're at a certain stage in your life, you're trying to project, credibility. And so that impacts your transparency, because people hide the fact that they don't know what they're talking about, and it hurts them. What advice do you have for leaders to be more transparent?
Yeah.
When you
So
coach people, what do you say to them?
yeah, so you need to start small. It's
Yeah,
not like
that's
one of the
good.
things I've seen people do is they've, had a suit of armor on, and then they're in their bikini, and it's scary for everybody, right? Like, not
Yeah.
that much, not so fast,
Actually, I want to be clear. I never went to college. I'm not the person who you think I am. Like, I'm not,
But I'm your CEO. Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
exactly. So there's a tempo and a tone that
Yeah,
you need to discover for yourself, and you find a compact group of like 6 people, personal and otherwise, where you kind of start practicing some
yeah,
of these things with them, so that you gain your confidence, so that when you come up, because here's the other truth: when people are following you and you're their leader, they deserve a leader that knows where they're going. All right.
right.
So if you get up and say, yeah, I really don't know what we're doing or where we're going, I don't really even know if I believe in the mission, even if that's your secret, undeniable truth, that's not appropriate to your stead. And what usually happens as you go through the transparency tenet and you really dig in, you'll find where your own gaps are in your leadership style. And you will, if you take this on, close those gaps pretty swiftly. But the caution sign is to secure a trusted group of people to practice with before you take it out on the road with yourself.
Um, I have a comment on that. Just some of my own personal experience with clients that have joined different, executive leadership
Mm-hmm.
groups. Do you know what I'm talking
Mm-hmm.
about?
Yes.
EO organization. I'm blanking on the name of the one that's like the most well known, but and I've known some of them. It's like the 6, business owners or CEOs in the
Mm-hmm.
area. They're in different industries, so they're not competing.
Yeah.
And right, they get together once a month, and they basically open up their heart and souls and share it, all their financial information, their tax returns,
Yep.
everything. And the need, in the effort to like say, listen, how can we all help each other,
Mm-hmm.
do our thing. And I got to tell you, without a single, difference. I mean, everyone that I've talked to has participated in something like that, have said that it's been incredibly powerful for them.
Mm-hmm.
And it's helped them with their
Yeah.
transparency,
It does help. Yeah.
it's a
But they
good,
had to have a cohort of safety,
yes.
right? And that's really the key. And when you're at the top of an organization or in a senior role, your support group doesn't exist below you.
Yeah.
And if you're lucky, you'll have some peers
Yeah.
and then some upper people. Um, so yeah, that's just a few words of advice when you're trying it out.
Yeah. That's good. That's really good stuff. So then you said the other tenet that people ask a lot
Compassionately
about is,
powerful.
yeah,
Yeah.
compassionately powerful. What does that
Yeah.
mean?
It means that as we lead our lives and each other in the world, that we understand our own sovereign power and the things that we're masterful at, and the gifts that we have to deploy, and we deploy them appropriately without do no harm kind of thing. At the same point, when we're doing that, we don't forget, and this is when I grew up in leadership, this wasn't even a conversation. We don't forget the human aspect sitting on the other side of the table when we're doing that. So we're taking into account respect and dignity for all parties and stakeholders, not just ourselves, not just the organization or corporate results. And when we do that, we can understand that we can both be powerful and we can be accountable, and we can require accountability, and we can leverage consequences. But inside of all of that, when you're really functioning at a high level here, there's no surprises, right? You don't walk in a room and fire someone and they don't understand. There was a process that you followed, respect for all parties. When they did or didn't do it, you celebrated or had the consequence. But what happens more often than not is that we're really busy leaders. And most organizations have us as working leaders, not just people leaders. So we're managing a technical acumen as well as a people stead of a group of people. And we don't have the discipline that we have in our technical space usually with our people processes. And so a lot of times, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. That's just unfortunately how it is. So we're dealing with the 20% of the people when there's 80% of the people that are functioning either high or at par, at least, that aren't getting what they need from you to not be surprised and to grow in the organization. And this group of people, let's say your CB players that have potential to be BA players, never have the opportunity because you're managing your D player to see if you can make them a D plus player because you don't have a process in place. And
No, go ahead, carry on.
So when you hold the compassionately powerful tenet, you honor a system that you've co-created with the people you're leading, and they will actually start to self-regulate. So they'll tell on themselves. They'll solve problems with each other before they bring them to you. There's really big keys that you're holding this compassionately powerful tenet in a dignified, respectful way for all parties.
I have a hard time believing that this can be learned. I feel like my sister is a family doctor. She has a nice practice here in Philadelphia. She is an amazing doctor and she's very compassionate, so she has the power of the medical practitioner. But like a patient of hers goes into the hospital or has or whatever, she always finds a way to connect it to something like, oh, I had something similar, or I read something that may connect to what you're experiencing right now, or like, I get it. You know what I mean? And there are many doctors that I've come across, I'm sure you have, that are brilliant, but can't hold a conversation with people because they don't have that. And geez, Lexi, you've been doing this for a long time. I mean, you've coached 1,000 different leaders. Can you, be transparent here. Can you?
Yes.
Can you teach somebody that doesn't have that in them to be compassionately powerful? Is that a teachable thing?
It is teachable because it sits in the EQ space, and that's a capacity you can grow. Okay. I think the dilemma for a lot of leaders in the B column that you just mentioned, mostly it's surgeons that I experience. They're so adept at the thing that they do, and there's a lack of empathy and understanding that they can't just talk to whoever they want in the surgeon room, because it really is life and death, and it really is life and death. And there's living people around you, right, at the same point. So what the gap usually is a leader that doesn't think they can or chooses not to be compassionate in the workforce also doesn't choose relationship as a key priority. And most leaders, their whole life will send that back to you to help them see in the mirror that that's possibly a thread of truth in their lives. So if they decide to choose relationship to self and others, then they can drop into the connecting tenet to come back to the compassionately powerful tenet.
I see. All right. Well, none of this, and you write about this in your book, none of this happens overnight. Right?
No.
this is tell me a little bit about, when you work with clients, because this is all part of your book, it's the process. What can someone expect of a commitment time-wise
Yeah.
really, implement these 6 tenets to become that graceful leader?
Yeah. So first of all, when I wrote the book, because I have a lot of books and I've read a lot of self-help books and leadership books, of course.
Sure.
And one of the things that was always often, but not always missing for me was it was very linear and checklisty. And then I thought, I did it. I got the t-shirt. I put the book on the shelf. That was the end of it. But I did all the things, right? I did them all. I was a good A student in class. And then I would promptly forget about it. And I certainly wouldn't practice it or didn't know how to take it from theory, the classroom, to the practical realm.
Okay.
This book's very different. I designed it so that when you read it, like when you go to the back of the book, there's a cheat sheet of the 6 tenets. I suggest you start there and
Okay.
you read through. And if any of those you go, huh, that's interesting, or oh, that's BS, that's a cue to go read that part of the book. Either answer. If you're just indifferent or you're like, yeah, okay, then just move past those. And I would say find 1 or 2 and dig into that tenet for a good 6 months.
Wow.
Then put the book down for a year and then come back. Once you've taken those tenets, I mean, it took me 6 or 7 years to have all these tenets integrated so I knew what they were, much less working well. I'm still doing that work.
Sure.
I'm still not always compassionately powerful, I'm not perfect, right? And
Sure.
so there's a refining process that happens over time. And your gifts and your talents as a human being will also draw you into some tenets where you're going to be amazing steward and deployer of. And other ones are just going to be ones you have to pick up sometimes, but it's part of leading. So you do it.
There's, in some books it's very easy to quantify success. There are metrics and benchmarks and KPIs that you can follow. How can you measure whether or not you're actually making progress with these 6 tenets?
So I can tell you in my own life, and then in those that I'm coaching, the things that come back after 6 months or a year, it's easy. Life is just a little easier. You're really clear on what your values and belief systems are, and you've upgraded or offloaded the ones that no longer serve you. So that when you're speaking and being in the world, people know who's coming and leaving. There's a clarity about you. And in that, then other people know how to interface with you. There's no hard work about what Lexi says isn't really what she means. It's just all really is what it is. There's a clarity. And then another really lovely, magical little tidbit is there's serendipities. And there's these things that come together that you're like, wow, how did that happen? And we're in a world right now, quite frankly, where, if you read another manifesting book, I don't even know, but things are happening faster. So if you are living an integrated life and you call something, someone, a resource or something in, the odds of it coming are pretty good. So be really clear about what you're asking for. But then when it shows up, be in the awe and wonder of that serendipitous moment, because it just brings more and more and more of those. It's, I don't really practice the law of attraction, but it's something that some people would understand if I said that. That feeling or that flow in life. It doesn't mean that there aren't problems. It just means life just gets easier and you're happier. Yeah.
All right, Alexsys, let me throw out a couple other concepts from the book for you in the last few minutes that we have, because I'd love you to expand on some of them. And by the way, I say the last few minutes, but feel free to talk. You talk about the difference between showing gratitude and giving recognition. Give us your thoughts on that.
Yeah. So gratitude's huge, right? In fact, in the book, I talk about it as the entry point to grace. So it's foundational. And so me using the word serendipity is an outcome of a gracious and gratitude-filled life. Okay. It's not an accident. It's very intentional. And I have had so many leaders say to me, they go and they start practicing gratitude, because that's part of working with me, is finding out what that means to you, what your barriers are to it. How do you want to express it in the world? There's a million ways.
So they start giving out employee awards.
Yeah, they'll come back and they'll say, well, I gave everybody so much gratitude that now everybody thinks they should get a raise. And I was like, well, did you express gratitude, or were you giving recognition? And was that clear? Right. And there's a clarity. Like, I can express gratitude for my time with you, right? For our continued commitment to connect, because it wasn't easy for us to connect. We're grateful we stuck with it. Right. At the end of this podcast, I may actually give you recognition for a job well done. it
Right.
may imbue some gratitude in the recognition, but they
Right.
are distinctly different things. And leaders would be well to understand it when they're speaking to their people, so they can be clear about what they're extending to their people.
I feel like also like the act of gratitude is it's a personal act as opposed to recognition, isn't it? I mean,
I would agree. It usually is more intimate. Yes.
yeah, it is
Yeah.
definitely a more, yeah, that's a better word for it. It's more
Yeah.
intimate. Yeah, where
I mean,
you're
yeah.
go ahead.
Even if you're like at the door and someone opens the door for you and you make eye contact, that nanosecond of eye contact can be extremely intimate when you say thank you to someone.
Which, by the way, not enough people do. I mean, I don't understand that. I walk
I
through
do.
doors into restaurants and stores and office, but like nobody holds the door for the person coming behind them. I don't get it.
I know it's a lost art. We need to
It
bring it back.
it is, and it is a matter of it's not even recognizing it. It's I am truly gracious, you're
Yeah.
grateful when people do that. I think it's just a
Yeah.
nice, dignified thing to do. Okay.
Yeah.
You talk about the graceful leader achieving results without sacrificing people. Tell me why you say that.
Okay. So sacrifice to me, so let me clear that. Let me be really clean about what sacrifice means in this context. It
Right?
means that I did harm up to someone else as they define it,
Okay.
not how as I define it, and or there was a surprise that someone, let's say I let someone go, there was a surprise. Those things don't exist with a gracious leader. So a gracious leader will let people go. That's not usually a hard thing for someone with grace as leadership. It's if there's a fierceness and a grit to it. However, they'll do it with that dignity, respect, and lack of surprise that I've talked about a little bit here.
Sure.
And so as a result of that, the person on the other side, when love and respect and dignity are intact in that graceful exchange, the other person can be with what is and not have to necessarily be defensive, right? Or have a mechanism come up to protect themselves from you.
Sure.
And that's how you know that you're getting better at that as you practice, because someone can just sit there and let the emotion of fear, sadness, grief, anger happen with you appropriately. And you can allow it to happen. You don't own it. They don't give it to you. And it all moves through both of you.
Hmm.
It's really, I don't know, one of the most amazing experiences I've ever had, to be in what most people would consider an intensely conflicted
Yeah.
conversation with someone, their livelihood,
Yeah.
and be hugging on the way out. It's transformative.
What is the process for getting there? I mean, when you think about a typical leadership role, a manager, an owner,
Yeah.
they've got employees that are reporting to them. The employees are always careful around the boss. They don't want to lose their jobs. They don't want to get other people in trouble, whatever the reason is.
Yeah.
And here you are, you want to be a grace leader. You want to say, listen, be completely honest with me. Tell me, but it's hard to extract that from somebody.
It
What's the
is.
process for getting there?
It is being that.
Okay.
This is where the distinction between consciousness and graciousness is most loudly pronounced. When you're being grace, people experience that.
Hmm.
Most of us can, if we're quiet for a minute, we can think of graceful things and graceful people. But if we try to put words to it, we get stuck. And that's because grace is it's an energetic exchange that happens between people. And I would argue other living entities, but between people in this case, and that person feels the love and respect you have for them, in as well as the words that you're articulating. But it's because you're being love and respect. But that's what it's a being, not a doing. And it's really challenging to learn where that resides. First, the biggest challenge is, where in my body does my love and grace reside? And it's different for everybody. But I talk about your grace center. Typically, it's like where your heart's located in your body and your solar plexus. That energy force is typically where most of us at least begin to access that grace point.
Hmm. Is any of this advice better received by younger managers versus older managers? When you're telling them this, are you getting more pushback from somebody in their 60s or less pushback from somebody that age
Well,
versus
so
somebody
it's
20
funny.
years younger?
Yeah. So someone in the 60s is just like someone in their 20s. They're both willing to go there. But it's the
Yeah.
person in their 40s and 50s
Yeah.
that's struggling
Yeah.
because we've accepted this system and
Yeah.
system. I don't know what other word to use. We've accepted that as the truth. But at 20, you have naivety. You don't know the truth.
You
And at
know,
60, you frankly don't care.
that's exactly right.
Right.
It
So
is
that
great being 60 years old, honestly. You
exactly.
get to a point in your life where you're like, I don't give a shit. And I'm going to be me because that's me,
Yep.
you know?
Yeah. Yeah. So that I think that's the funny answer to the inquiry.
And it's also, I know it's difficult to generalize and you don't feel like you have to in this case, but is there any considerations to be made for offering this kind of advice, for being a graceful leader, if you're a female leader versus a male leader? It seems to me it's, I don't know, both genders have their challenges.
They do. And so the first thing that we talk about isn't so much a gender, but about an energy source. There's masculine energy and feminine energy. We all have all of it. And there's men that lead through feminine energy, and there's men who lead through masculine energy, and vice versa for women. So for me, for example, I learned through the masculine. So that's how I was deploying myself. I had to unlearn that and start to learn, well, what does feminine mean? And that's the compassionately powerful tenet came into being, was I didn't have to drop my masculine accountability and results in order to also bring in the feminine energy of compassion and respect and dignity with a person. So it's both.
All right, we're almost done here. You've been awesome.
Okay.
This is a great, I mean, it's just an introduction to all the content that's in this book. You give advice, in the final third of the book about, traveling down this road. One of the things that you talk about to become a graceful leader, you talk about taking a misalignment inventory. And just, this will be my last question, but actually
That's
my
okay.
next to last question. Tell me what you mean by that and why it's a good first step to take.
Yeah, it is cathartic at best. I remember when I did it, and I share with you, it took me a long time. And that was where I started to realize that the the masculine way of being in the world that I was deploying and making all the metrics and exceeding them and winning awards, was I had a lot of damaged souls, quite frankly, around me. And I would say I didn't care, but I didn't even know not to care.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So once I came into the holy shit, what have I done?
Yeah.
And then it's like a 12-step program, quite frankly. And I literally used that methodology. And I went back and had conversations 15, 20, 25 years back, apologizing, because when you know better, you do better. Right. So I was going back and saying, hey, if I had known then what I know now, I would never. And I'm so sorry. Some people would laugh and be like, I don't even remember it.
Were
Right.
some people calling you and say, yeah, you really were an asshole back
And
then.
that also happened. And a couple of people said, thanks, but no thanks.
Wow. Okay.
The hurt was so much
Wow.
that they weren't willing to offer me the grace of coming back into any relationship. And that's okay. And but that takes a lot of fortitude and a lot of willingness to be uncomfortable in your own self. And it's still hard for me to do that.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. All right. Good advice. Good advice. My final question just has to do with your readers. In the end, who do you want reading this book?
Anybody that wants to be the best version of a leader that's heart-centered and head-centered. It's all of who you are coming out online. They're all important, and you might want to learn one and then another, but when you're ready to put it all together, I think this is a great place to come be and understand how to deploy yourself as a whole person.
The book is called The Power of a Graceful Leader, Flow, Integration, Alignment. I've been speaking with Alexsys Thompson. By the way, for those of you guys that are looking at this up on Amazon, Alexsys Thompson is the same as Lexi Thompson, just so there's no confusion there. Lexi, thank you. Great conversation, great book. I do encourage everyone to buy it.
Thanks.
Thank you. And thanks everyone for watching and listening to BizBooks. My name is Gene Marks. I hope you've enjoyed this conversation. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another conversation with another author of a business book that I'm sure that you will enjoy. Again, thanks for watching and listening. We'll see you again soon. Take care.